Hi, it's Jack Sweeney. Welcome to another episode of 123 by CFO Thought Leader, where we feature 3 different CFOs and highlight some of their strategic thinking, defining career moments, and favorite pastimes. First up, meet Karen Williams, CFO of American Express Global Business Travel. During the early years of her finance career, Karen jumped from a family-owned business, candy maker Mars, to American Express. Looking back, Karen reflects on how, as an introvert, the American Express culture would teach her to network and reach out, allowing her to advance in her career. Ultimately, Karen pegs perseverance as the optimal fuel for every career. Next, Matt Collis, CFO of PairSoft, underscores the hidden importance of cash flow management, from order-to-cash cycles to careful oversight of expense and growth. He reveals how CFOs must anticipate every pitfall. Finally, Ken Bowles, CFO of Wilson, highlights the power of taking chances on diverse backgrounds. He recounts shifting in his own career from military service to corporate finance, emphasizing how open-minded hiring would ultimately unlock his own potential. And so let's begin. 1, 2, 3.
So I was at Mars before I went to Amex, and for me it was just going from a family small company. That was the difficult transition into the corporate world. Mars was it's a very different company because it was a private company. Loved their philosophy. Everyone would swipe in their time card each day, because we underneath us was the factory, and so wanted to treat everyone the same. The MD wore his whites on a Friday, factory whites. So great environment, but I just didn't get it in terms of the importance of the relationships and that network. And so after a couple of years, I left and went to Amex, which was an incredible culture as well, very people focused, very relationship driven. And I had learned the importance of those relationships and the networking. But initially at Amex, it took time. So it took a long time for me to move from being an analyst to a manager. But that was about the time to build those relationships and build that credibility. But then once I got to that manager level, things seemed to accelerate very quickly. And I would say it was a mix of learning in terms of managing relationships and building the network around me and investing the time in that. But it was also an element of being in the right place at the right time. I was in a role in a European role, looking after our investment process, and I didn't have a leader. So I reported directly for a period of time, into the CFO of the divisional CFO. And so I got exposure to her. And from there, she really became my sponsor. And probably the next 3 or 4 roles, she was pivotal in really helping make those happen. So, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And so it definitely wasn't an immediate thing. I would say I reflected on it and realized the importance of it and connected the dots as to why things just didn't work out for me. And so I then made a concerted effort. When things don't go right, that's when you learn the greatest things, right? So I really made an effort, and I will say, so I'm an introvert, and so it doesn't come naturally, but I worked at it and I made a real effort, and I was very fortunate to be in a culture that was very welcoming, was very much a people culture based upon relationships. And so people's doors were always open. And so I just kept at it. And my advice is, the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And I certainly wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't kept going And one of my mantras is never give up, and I never gave up on it.
The toughest part of being a CFO is trying to find middle ground as a partner to the CEO and to the board and play that role. You have to be tough and drive the business to deliver on expectations, holding the team accountable for meeting commitments. And sometimes you have to be the tough guy that, beats people up and makes for some tough conversations. That's part of your job. The other part is that you want to be seen as a partner, and you want to have a relationship that's collaborative with your peers and the staff. You want to be one of the gang, and you want to, have a relationship that they'll confide in you, they'll ask for help, and see you as a real partner. So that's I've gotten myself, stuck in between that, and sometimes if the business requires it, you're the tough person for a long time.
Is you have to always manage the metrics. You got to manage earnings. You got to manage revenue growth, but you also have to manage the way that you grow revenue. If you try to overinvest and you don't get the ROI, what ends up happening is you start running out of cash because those revenue growth targets aren't converting to cash quick enough. So it's one of those things that I think new CFOs can very easily get caught into, of not really looking down the road and making sure that their models are converting the cash enough to pay the bills, or if there is a pitfall, that they're not raising the flag. This is where an area where early CFOs can get caught up in saying, yeah, the business is growing, everything's fine. I've lived it. I've lived it both on when it's good and lived it when it's bad. I mean, during COVID, many of us went through a point where, customers and suppliers were holding back, and we were running out of cash, and we had to I was managing cash on a weekly basis to get through it. So, cash is an underrated thing, maybe strategic, maybe not, but I would definitely say something that would want to share with everybody. First is, how is their, AR conversion? I mean, that's one of the first things is what is your billing cycle? I will first look at what is I call it order to cash. So everything from when an order comes in, you either sign a quote, whether it's, manufacturing or software, what does that cycle look like? And has that cycle changed at all? That's the first thing, because that's going to be your cash inflow machine. Then the second thing is, looking at your growth rates. So comparing your revenue growth rates to your expense growth rates. And so it can be very sneaky where you might be adding a couple of, software services, or you might have added a new office or a few employees, and it's just starting to creep up on you. No different than if you look at your personal budget and you start adding new services, whether to a subscription or you go buy a car. And if your income isn't growing as fast as those expenses, you might not notice it in the beginning, but it will slowly start catching you. So first is order to cash, and then I look at the trends, the trend line of my revenue. Because if I know my order to cash is okay, then I start looking at the trends of how are my expenses trending. Then the last thing will be, is there any big, I would say software CapEx. I would say outside of your income statement. So you have outside of your income statement charges. You could have in 2022, a lot of companies got challenged with raising interest rates. So if you had variable interest rate loans, interest rates went up, and that was an area that we looked at the business, and the business looks great. Where's all the money going? Well, our interest rate just went up by 4%, and it's just sucked the money out because the models weren't attuned to that increase in interest rates. So there's probably in my role, I probably have 10 different steps, but that would probably be the quick rundown that I would go through.
in my role, well, think about what's on the CEO's mind. Think about what's on the board's mind. And the reason I say that I see this as really critical advice as you step into a role is that it will quickly force you to think about what really matters beyond just the financials, beyond the finance topics, which invariably you'll get sucked in, right? Hey, you're here because we want to scale the business, put in the right processes, put in the right visibility. I think it's a risk to be too focused on that and forgetting, well, what's on the CEO's mind? Because in the end, a CFO's success is based on how effective he or she is in supporting the CEO and the rest of the executive team. So if you are not solving what's on the CEO's mind, it gets challenging. Like, you're not focused on the right things. And then relatedly, if you're not focused on what's on the board's mind, doesn't mean you have to do specifically what they say, but at least be aware of their questions.
I think the one big thing, and this kind of goes back to, coming out of the military and transitioning from military to the corporate world. I spent a lot of time, obviously, went to college, learned a lot about different types of finance, got my MBA while I was in the military at the University of South Carolina when I was there. But I didn't have the corporate experience, right? I didn't have that background. And so going into, interviews and going out to try to find a new opportunity when I was going to transition can be difficult. And it can be difficult for military people. A lot of the skills that you learn in the military, don't seem transferable, right? And so it's a lot of explaining on what you do and how does that apply to different types of job, particularly when you get into something like finance versus just general leadership or business management or things like that. So I was lucky enough to kind of meet a CFO at GE during that process that was willing to take a chance on me, right? And that is something that I think every one of us within the finance organization needs to realize, that you're going to have people within that organization and people that support you that are going to come from different backgrounds. It's not going to be always cookie cutter, and you need to kind of take the chance on some people and make it work out. And I was lucky enough. It obviously worked out for them. I spent 15 years there, and it worked out for me because I got to learn a lot and had a great experience there, and I think did a great job. So I think that's one thing that I've tried to do throughout my career is just understand that regardless of the background, make sure you're bringing the right people into your organization. I've hired people that have history backgrounds and not a finance degree. I've hired people that have come up from, all the way from being an admin assistant into finance roles. And, if they're smart and they're driven, they're going to be successful for you. And so sometimes take a chance. I think going into the pure finance moment, and I kind of mentioned this earlier as well, moving from a big public company to a private equity backed, private company, your view on results are different, right? Coming up, public company, a big company like GE, very quarterly focused, private equity firms, much longer horizon, very more strategic focused. And so I think that big moment for me was just realizing that, truly, even on public companies and even, with private companies, that finance leaders, you can sometimes get trapped into focusing purely on those short-term results, right? The quarterly results, the performance versus making, long-term strategic-based decisions. And we've all seen that. You see that with, some of the poor decisions that some of the companies have made even recently, right? And companies that do very large layoffs, right? You've seen the studies on layoffs, and we've all seen the studies on layoffs. Yes, it's a really great short-term fix for a profitability problem and a performance problem, but in the end, you end up hiring a lot of those roles back, paying more for those roles, and you end up spending more in the long run. And so, trying to take a look at those decisions in a much longer horizon is something that I have spent my time doing, and been lucky enough to have leaders and work with teams that believe in that as well. Because I think you're going to make, as a CFO, a much different decision if you're not so much worried about the quarter result versus the longer term return for shareholders and investors. And so that's one of those experiences that, I think every one of us should learn. And it goes beyond just even finance or as a CFO, it's business leaders as well. It's, yes, it's important, but don't make every decision just purely on the quarterly result and really trying to look at how that impacts the business in the long term. Because your plan is to be there for a while and for a long time, not to be there just for a quarter. So.
Previously we couldn't, really apply AI to that non-structured data. You can now, right? We can do things like summarizing call transcripts. We can do things like if you are a member and you're calling into one of our care centers and you want to hear about your labs, all that lab information can get synthesized by AI and presented to the call center person who can, then share that with our members. So there are a lot of, I think, synthesizing, lots of activities that we're finding which are logic trained where, instead of having a human do it, we can have AI do it.
Thank you for joining us on 123. From Karen Williams' emphasis on relationship building to Matt Collis' insights on mastering cash flows and Ken Bowles' reminder to embrace diverse backgrounds. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to CFO Thought Leader. I'm Jack Sweeney. Until next time, this is 123.